Paul, so you and I know each other from way back, but I think it would be useful if we can update everybody about what you're doing right now. The last time I left, you were in a senior position at ILO. So what about you doing these days?
Yeah, well, look, I'm still I'm a senior specialist for skills and employability at the ILO. I lead the work team on skills policies and systems. And, since the beginning of 2019 and into last year, there's been growing interest in the digitalisation of TVET and skills systems, not only in terms of learning, training delivery, training assessment, certification, but also in terms of the management of systems, quality assurance, and other regulatory functions. But clearly, within the last 6 months since the pandemic has struck, there's been, as you know, an acceleration of some of those trends that have been in place, and we're increasingly getting requests from our constituents, so employers and workers organisations, as well as governments, seeking support to assist them with this transformation. And most of it is in the teaching and learning space, but there are also some examples of requests related to the digitalisation of workflows and accreditation systems, which really aren't directly related to COVID, but I guess have been triggered by the broader conversation around digitalisation that has flown on from COVID. Within the ILO, we've been doing quite a lot of work looking at the labour market impact of the pandemic, both in terms of employment, but also in terms of what implications that has for skills development. An area that we've done, that we're getting demands for again, is the rapid assessment of skill needs, but also looking at alternate sources of data. Colleagues in the statistics and employment branches working with nowcasting and, alternate sources of data and information on economic activity, on the impact of employment, given that there aren't the normal sources of data. Labour force surveys are simply not happening. Our interest is very much in terms of learning and supporting institutions to deal with some of the professional development challenges that they're facing for managers, for trainers, and in partnership with the International Training Centre in Turin, for example, we've introduced programs focusing on the introduction of digital learning, content management systems, learning management systems, digital tools for communication and student support. ITC itself is actually moving all its programs online. So we've, as a provider, if you like, we're also now delivering technical training around skills, employment, labour market issues. We've had a MOOC running on apprenticeships, which attracted 1,500 participants. And just like everyone else, the whole webinar, Zoom way of living is with us as well. It certainly shifted our focus a little bit. And there's been, strong internal pressure for us to respond to the new demands generated by COVID. Yeah.
I want to try and bridge in a way between, your world, the ILO world, which, I got to know a couple of years ago, and we were doing some work with the ILO on digitalization, I guess, and looking at digital credentials, and the project that we're running for the Commission, which is called Dell for All. And it started out, when we got this approved, we were really looking at the impact, primarily of things like the blockchain on the future of education. A mix, I guess, of COVID hitting, and also a feeling, I guess, that blockchain, the whole blockchain world had been very slow in terms of adapting to this, or the opportunities that we'd identified with blockchain education hadn't crystallized very quickly. The Commission basically said we really need to refocus on a wider birth of emerging technologies. So looking at things like, AI, Internet of Things, virtual reality, that whole gamut. COVID then made things very interesting. And as you said, there's this whole being mad scramble to online stuff. And I think from my perspective, I think there's a couple of things that maybe, we should also look at. I mean, one is when you were starting to mention data. One of the challenges that Dell for All at the moment is like coming up with surveys and trying to get people to respond to those surveys. There's maybe some way that we could collaborate, I think, on getting some of these joint surveys, because we've got, the EU and the Commission behind us. And we want to make sure we're asking the right kind of questions, then get the right kind of data. So I think in terms of data sharing, I think that's an obvious way that can become a win-win, I guess, for Dell for All and the ILO. But what I'm really interested in is something which I know used to be close to your heart, which skills mismatches. Remember that? Mm-hmm. We used to talk about what are we rolling out in this thing called education, and what we're rolling out in this thing called TVET, which is even closer to your heart. And what are we going to do now that we're in this kind of COVID world? That there's Claudia's in our office in Valletta, and I haven't been there for a couple of weeks, if not more. That even the future of the office, as far as I'm concerned, is going to change. Let alone the future of things like work-based learning and apprenticeships. And so I'm looking at this kind of world, which for me used to be pretty much a standard ILO, that's where you guys are focused on. COVID happening, the holy grail of technology, which is, what we're being told by the Commission is find out if these new shiny tools can really help the future of education. And the reality is none of us know. So I'm just throwing this back at you. Mm-hmm. How are you readjusting as the ILO to this brave new world we're all having to face?
Yeah, well, look, one of the things I guess that's has been thrown up by COVID, and we've done a little bit of research, interagency research. We've done two large surveys, one with UNESCO and the World Bank, looking at policy targeting vocational training institutions. I think we got 1,500 responses from 140 countries or something, just looking at what the impact has been. Apart from the things I mentioned before, obviously digital skills came out as a key issue, digital skills of teachers and trainers, digital skills of managers, but also learners as well. But the second survey was, even with a larger group of organisations, including the Commission, was looking at work-based learning and enterprise training practices, including the impact on apprenticeships, work placements, internships. And, I think there are some sobering sort of results coming out of that. The report hasn't been published yet. The two of them are in sort of final write-up stage. But, there's a clear indication that enterprises, both small, medium and large, are planning to reduce their budgets for staff training. Over 30% of enterprises that had apprentices either stopped paying them or let them go, and 60% of enterprises, I think it was, indicated their intention to shift future training activities more down the digital path to online or to blended. So, in terms of the development of practical and technical skills, which is the mainstay of TVET, you know, I think there's a couple of worrying sort of trends in all that. You know, one is that the technology, to develop technology to replace the opportunities that work-based learning provide through VR, AR, or simulations is not something that's going to happen overnight, and has a relatively high cost. So you know, that's a stumbling block that is there at the same time that access to workplaces for learning potentially is going to be constrained, including through, you know, what you said in terms of the changing workplace and the shift to teleworking, and, you know, some of the stuff you're reading about. I mean, I think it was yesterday I read BP, you know, shifting 50,000 employees to teleworking, flexible office arrangements, and downscaling their commercial property portfolio. So there are implications for learning, work-based learning in particular, and I don't think we fully you know, understand what that's going to be. Of course, it depends on you know, what markets you're talking about, and you know, we tend to work more in low and middle income countries, but clearly work in high income countries as well. So, you know, whether or not that work-based learning trend is going to unfold the same way in those different contexts, you know, it probably won't, but we don't know. Of course, the whole impact on the informal sector, and you know, which struggles to really engage with learning on the job in a formal and recognised way, is going to be more affected as well. So yes, I mean, for some years, I think, you know, it looks as though it's going to be playing itself out. Not just the virus, but you know, in terms of the implications of
what do we need?
Yeah.
It's almost like we're flying blindly, and I think one of the dilemmas I think we're facing is that on one side we've got all of these shiny new technologies coming on board. Okay, the various AIs. Okay, the fact that you know, I think the old thing that you can phone your hairdresser, but it's not your hairdresser who's actually answering the phone. It's some sort of wonderful application, and you know, and yet on the other side, as you were saying, when people come back, they say we need people to have digital skills. Okay, and deconstructing about what these digital skills are, I think that's one of the challenges that we have.
Yeah.
I think we didn't delve for all what we're looking at. So what skills do we need people to have? And these shiny new things, the various blockchains, automated AIs, virtual reality things, are these things going to mesh? Are we looking at things which are too far off the radar, and we really need to look at basics like digital literacies, knowing how to spend hours on end looking at a screen like everybody else has to now to even work? So I don't know if there's, you know, which world we're supposed to wade in, because again, this is part of our ongoing discussion with the Commission.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, you know, we've just gone through the process of reviewing the framework for core work skills that the ILO produced, you know, 6 or 7 years ago now. And, you know, we've developed a discussion paper, had some interesting interactions with other agencies, including the Commission. And clearly the role or the place of digital skills within, you know, a generic skills framework was a key point of discussion. I mean, the ILO's worked with the International Telecommunications Union on digital skills, so I think we're quite comfortable with that framework of basic, intermediate, and advanced skills. But basic really become part of, as you say, a digital literacy as a foundation skill, or in, you know, what you could call generic skills. But, you know, I think this whole area, this whole taxonomy issues around skills, digital, core, technical, is pretty murky, and you know, there isn't any consistent sort of language around it. There's tensions around the inclusion of attributes or attitudes, but when it comes to digital, I think we're kind of in the same. We're sort of facing the same challenges that the whole generic skills debate has faced for the last 20 years. And that really is, how do you shift delivery, assessment, and reporting in a way that develops generic skills? And let's lump digital skills in there. Yeah. So, how do you develop digital skills through the normal delivery of technical skills? So you're not teaching, Moodle. You're using Moodle, and people are learning how to use Moodle because they're learning, I don't know, welding or something, So it's, that challenge has been there for the advocates of generic skills for many years. And I think in some ways it's the same thing that digital skills advocates are facing now, although clearly with digital skills, as you look at what you might call intermediate or advanced digital skills, they're very occupational specific, and so in a sense, they're technical skills in their own right and apply within sectors and across sectors. So it's a little bit more complicated, I guess. But in terms of basic digital literacies, yes, I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done and a lot of emphasis on that. And I think you're seeing that. Not only, say, for example, the ILO's involved in its own Decent Jobs for Youth global initiative, and there's quite a lot of attention paid to digital skills development in Africa at the moment, a continental-wide initiative with the African Union and the African Development Bank and the ILO. You've got other platforms like UNICEF-led Generation Unlimited, which again is putting a lot of emphasis on core and digital skills. And then increasingly, and I think which seems to have been accelerated by the COVID situation, is the input of the vendors and some of the partnerships that have been established. Microsoft, Huawei, other vendors suddenly getting involved in national partnerships around education and learning, which I think they weren't as engaged in the past as they have been now, because it's been seen to be part of their sort of emergency response, if you like, to the learning crisis that systems found themselves in in the first quarter of the year.
Yeah, in terms of competencies, I mean, the Commission has spent many years developing these digital competence frameworks, and they're pretty good. And they have digital competence frameworks for educators. The JRC has been particularly at the forefront for educators, for citizens, for countries. And I just feel that because of what's happened now, because everybody had to scramble to a screen, in some cases within 24 hours. I know at my university, Italy, shut down in 24 hours, and suddenly you were expected to be teaching online within 24 hours when there were some people who had actually, prided themselves, let me put it this way, in spending many years resisting the screen.
Yes.
Okay, and many people.
I can imagine.
Okay?
Yeah,
People,
kicking and screaming.
Kicking and screaming, and then people starting to talk about GDPR and people not wanting stuff shared and things like that.
Right.
And I just want to keep on teasing this idea of the skills and the jobs that we need, which is on one side, which is, for me, going back to Del for All, which is this digital education that we need to be rolling out. And what's actually happening with the labor market. Because again, one of the things that we always find, and I'm sure you find more, is that, you've got higher education institutions rolling out graduates, and then they go into the labor market saying these are not the skill sets that we need. And then it's like, whose responsibility is it? So, and I was always a one issue now. And I guess that's how the TVET sector also started coming in and saying, yeah, we can train you to have more applied skills than what learning philosophy at university might give you for that. And I'm just wondering now, with what I think is going to be the collapse of the whole office way of doing things, if social distancing is going to be there for at least the next 18 months, what do you think are going to be these? Like, it's almost like, what can we do, I think, collectively, those of us who are working at a policy level, at a commission? Because one of the things we need to do is help the commission decide, in terms of its funding regimes from 2021 onwards, what can it do to address these kind of problems that we're addressing. So I think maybe it's an unfair question, but I think it's one we need to keep on asking. Is education still relevant? What can policymakers do to make this education/TVET as skills that we need work when we don't actually know what's going to happen? But I think we can guess, or make some informed guesses.
Yeah, I look, in terms of skills anticipation and, the work that we've been doing over many years in looking at how you analyze changes to jobs, changes in occupations, changes in task composition, what that means for skill needs, and then somehow connecting that with the planning and curriculum development and programming. That link has always been weak. That link has always been weak, and so whilst it is clearly possible to track what those trends are, I think the challenge is how that gets picked up in education and training systems, and how there's change within curriculum and qualification design, and that automatically then introduces another series of problems around how or who's responsible for standards and curriculum and teaching and program design. Where's the level of flexibility at the local level? How good are the signals, but from the labour market to the education and training system, is it clearly understood, et cetera, or trickling down to the capacity of institutions to actually shift and deliver new skills. But I think, just picking up on a couple of things you said, I think in the short term, there really probably does need to be some resources put towards the collective development of some, cheap, off-the-shelf AR, VR technologies, and maybe they're out there. I don't claim to be an expert in this, but something that institutions can really use to start bridging that gap and start to reduce as much as possible the reliance on physical equipment and workshops for the delivery of skills. And clearly it's going to be easier, more easily done in some occupations than it is for others, and there are clearly occupations where frankly it's almost not possible. But related to that, I think also is some work around, what does a really good virtual internship look like? What does a good virtual, or, how can you change the structure of an apprenticeship to allow for, blended learning, mixed mode delivery, project-based, problem-based learning using technology? I think there's some potential for that to be worked out. I mean, we know with internships, including those that are part of a formal curriculum, that, they're often quite weak. The quality of learning is weak. There's no link to assessment. And, often it's disguised employment. So, how can you use how can you use technology to still make those opportunities available for people to participate virtually in work teams, but safeguard those issues as well as construct learning activities that they actually, benefit from. So I think in the area of virtual internships, I mean, we're already seeing it here in, where I am in Geneva. There's a large UN presence. A lot of young graduates rely on, the UN for internships. And we're already seeing some agencies offering virtual internships and pushback from groups like the Fair Internship Initiative, which represent students saying, look, this is... we had problems with your internships beforehand. This is even worse, sort of thing. So, there's some interesting issues yet to play out. But one of the things we found with our survey of institutions in low and middle income countries, 60 to 70% of institutions just shut their doors. They couldn't respond. They couldn't maintain operations because they just didn't have the capacity in terms of, infrastructure, but also, digital resources. So it was bandwidth, equipment, as well as skills that were the issue. So there's no easy way out of that or around those problems necessarily.
Yeah, I think it's like, in a way, you got me spinning about just talking about the virtual internships and young people and the idea of what used to be a very mobile young internship workforce, even in Europe, right? The Erasmus schemes. Okay, the university where I teach used to be the rigor that, second year students, the bright ones, always went away and spent, at least 1 semester or 2 semesters away. Is that still going to be the case or not? I think that's one of the things which I'm not sure of. So again, this idea of a virtual internship could be really interesting. The second thing is, you also mentioned Africa early on, and one of the things we're looking at the center, for instance, is looking at ODA, Africa, what can we do? Because we're also speaking to young people who come to countries like Malta, which are like very sophisticated and sort of like, you get to be a doctor in Malta, you get to be whatever it is. And then how can you help people when they go back to their countries to become ambassadors in a way for what they've learned? Can you provide them with tools, technologies, and things like that? So, and I know you and I have spoken about these kind of things. But the third point I want to make is, which is a particularly obsessive thing for me, is this idea of what I call interoperability and helping the migrant workforce. Okay, so that, and this goes to things like credentials. That I've done a course in Geneva, and then I came to Malta, did something else, and I went off to Spain. Now, the European Commission is investing a lot of money, even in building infrastructure for this. There's the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure. I'm actually involved in the background helping out. And I think the challenge I always find is twofold. One is the Commission rightly saying that education is not the prerogative of the Commission, but it's the prerogative of individual member states. And yet we know that for something to happen on a pan-European basis, there has to be a bit of a carrot and a stick involved. How can you, if you're going to build something, an infrastructure, say, enabling you that whatever credential you have has been notarized on the blockchain and everybody recognizes it. Yes, the technology can enable you to do it, but you need the policymakers to agree to that. So how can institutions like the ILO and other people really bring this to the agenda, that no matter how much money you're going to invest in technology, there needs to be buy-in at a pretty high level. High level here, I'm talking about ministerial level and things like that.
Yeah. Well, look, it's part of the focus of our work in Africa and, related to the Commission as well. There's quite a lot of research and analysis going into skills portability. And let's just take Africa as an example, because that's probably, well, I know that one a little bit, but also in the ASEAN region, linked to the free movement of labour, the new protocols there, and how there have been some sector level agreements in terms of common standards and qualifications. Tourism and hospitality, accounting, I think there's another 2 or 3 going on. There's skills recognition pilots underway. So that's an example of a region that's probably more advanced in terms of recognizing skills across borders and backing that up with fairly high level policy commitments, but on the ground action. Slow, but there is progress in some sectors. In Africa, again, migration is a clear driver. The Addis Convention that for the recognition of higher education qualifications, the UNESCO Convention has now been ratified. I think they've got comes into force because they've got the minimum number of ratifications now, but that has taken, I think 5 or 6 years or something to get to that stage. So it is very, very slow. I mean, the Europeans are supporting the development of an African continental qualifications framework. There's quite a lot of work happening at the level of economic and regional communities, you know, ECOWAS, but also SADC in the south. There are agreements in place, and there are protocols, and there are examples of recognition of international qualifications, but it's certainly not as advanced as it is in Europe. The technology isn't being used to the same extent. You know, I sat through a briefing of the new Europass tool, and you know, the digital credential link there. You know, that at the moment would still just be at the periphery of discussions within Africa. But let me say, it's certainly on the agenda, and there's growing interest in maximising labour mobility in the continent through better systems of skills and qualifications recognition. But I think one of the challenges is that, again, there really isn't very good data along supply chains or along or in particular sectors, which clearly demonstrate what the labour dynamics are. You know, where are people moving from? Where are they moving to? To what extent are skills even an issue for them in terms of finding employment, securing employment? You know, I think, again, I'm not an expert on this, but I think, you know, there's a view that skills and qualifications are really only quite a small piece of this. There are a whole lot of other issues around how labour markets function in these countries and in these sectors that have more of a bearing on whether or not someone moves or not, rather than, you know, what qualification. But of course, it depends on the occupation. And for professional occupations, then clearly there's a stronger link between a particular credential and employment. Whereas for paraprofessionals and semi-skilled, you know, there's hardly any link really, because it's about networks of patronage. It's about, you know, what experience you've had. So the whole question of skills recognition and portability sort of becomes a secondary level issue. But going back to your original point, clearly on the agenda, and we're trying to ensure that you know, policymakers and the regional platforms keep it on their agenda and move forward to address the barriers that we think exist around these issues.
I think the idea of data, I mean, the need for data is extreme. I'll give you a practical example as well. I think it was in April, because I was kind of involved in it. The EU had this thing called EU versus the virus hackathon, and there were like thousands of people. And I went in as a mentor to one of, you know, so for like 2 days, nobody slept and things like that. And there were many projects I could see in the pipeline, and the assumptions were really interesting, because the assumptions were, one, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Whatever they used to do yesterday is not the case anymore. 2, however, new businesses are going to emerge out of the carnage of whatever, the wreckage of what we've got. 3, can we use these technologies, the various blockchains, AIs, to quickly find out? And some of them were even looking like almost like geotagging, like on your mobile, that you say, and they were also saying a lot of people are stuck. They won't be able to move because the airports are closed. So how can you get those kinds of skill sets, which a lot of people might not know that you have, to get you gainfully employed, even if you've lost the job that you used to have? I think there was one company that we spoke to, it was called Skill Lab, and literally it was like, that's what they were trying to do. It's like this kind of matching. Now, it might seem very low level, but I think in a way, the way we're reading this is there's a crisis of the traditional education institutions. There is no doubt about it. You know, I'm just looking at what's going to happen in the US, you know, with a lot of investment in bricks and mortar. Many of those campuses are going to be used for something else, I suspect, instead of what they're being used for. 2, education, whether it's at TVET level or higher education level, has been forced kicking into this screen world. Let's look at the online world. we're not really doing online education well. I mean, just as a bare example, it's very difficult to stream video live using Zoom, for instance, because it will buffer. So there are the tools that still have to be, let alone all the problems that our people are having in terms of data and safety of data. So I'm just wondering that with you know, the jobs of the future, we don't know what they are, but there are these technologies that in a way have been latent. You know, blockchain's been around for quite a while now. As I know, I mean, you know, we commissioned us to write a report for you almost like 2 years ago. What's happened, you know? And I just keep on wondering whether out of this crisis, deep crisis, and I keep on thinking the other thing is, and I want to stop with this one, is you have generations like my son's generation that's 18, that have been learning of YouTube for years on end, but nobody's acknowledged that learning, okay? If you want to learn about anything, you know that. You're just going to go on YouTube and just go and see, you know, learn something. And we haven't acknowledged that. And I'm just wondering whether we should really now call out the elephant in the room. And then maybe a lot of the stuff that we were obsessed with, you know, might not be deemed to be work in this emergency situation. Maybe we should be investing more into these kind of skill sets. I know how to do this, and so will you. So maybe back to MOOCs, which became very unsexy in the last couple of years. So sorry, I'm just brain dumping that.
Yeah. No, okay, there's a few different ideas there, but I mean, let me just pick niche an issue, because I agree, you know, that you know, this whole you know, the pandemic has clearly seen a lot of people who've been laid off either temporarily or permanently or furloughed or whatever, or working from home. You know, the first thing that they're told to do is, if you've got spare time, go and learn something. You know, it happened within the ILO. We've got admin staff who are sitting around twiddling their thumbs because, you know, the whole work routine had changed, and went off and did short course stuff, some micro learning. And so the whole question of yeah, you know, is that recognised? How is it verified? How can it form part of someone's, you know, e-portfolio or skills profile? You know, as you know, the report that you wrote for us, you know, flagged the potential for that. But really, has anything changed? I mean, the only thing, again, it's not wholly my space, but you know, I do sort of pay attention a little bit to what goes on around qualification frameworks, and there are some interesting examples of some national qualification authorities saying, okay, let's think about how we can bring that informal learning more easily into a formal recognition framework, and particularly, and now including badges and other forms of you know, micro certification, if you like, and there are some examples, but it seems that there's still, you know, they're hedging their bets still. It's like saying, yes, we're recognizing that learning, but we're not giving it the same status of recognition. It's inferior learning. And that, you know, that's been the problem that's plagued the whole recognition and validation of non-formal and informal learning over the last, you know, 20 years. Yeah. So, you know, is it going to be any different? I don't know. Is it? Well, I mean, you'd like to think so, and you know, why is it? Because people still don't understand blockchain and how it can be used to verify informal, non-formal learning. You know, I don't know. You know, I'd have to go and sit in a qualifications authority and get a handle on what they're thinking. But at least there's some signs that people are open to that now, because they recognise. But, you know, education and training systems move so slowly. You know, there's always a time lag.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in a way this dovetails into this Dell for All project. Mm-hmm. I mean, from its very basics, okay, what if COVID hadn't happened, Dell for All would have acquired knowledge through large gatherings, through conferences that we're going to have. So we had one scheduled in Malta in September, which obviously isn't going to happen as face-to-face. And you'd acquire knowledge that way, okay? So even the very basic tenet of how do you get data and surveys and things like that is changing, okay? And it's something we're trying. So one of the things we should be looking at is even partnering up with the ILO. Was we have this moment of the Commission's attention, which is what we have with this project. And I guess this crisis of, it's not just the credential and the skill set, it's that, how are we going to get people back to work, to do meaningful work at a time when everybody's economy is just tanking, I think. So I think that's going to be quite important. And also, I think we now have layers of other problems which have been there forever, which I know you guys have been tangling with. Women in jobs, gender issues. I kept on thinking that surely now's the time when there should be more women getting into, it's like the labor market, because everybody's had to stay home, because one of the traditional problems people have had is especially women with young children, that they couldn't, go and get a job because you're looking up. So again, I'm just wondering, in this collective mess that we have, whose job is it to educate the market on what the blockchain can do, or maybe forget blockchain, look at something much more lower level. I just don't think that things like needing to demonstrate skill sets is going to go away, whether you know how to spray cars, or you're a panel beater, or whether you're a doctor. I don't think that's going to go away. I think increasingly we're going to have to be using the screen, I think, to demonstrate our skill sets, and that changes the dynamic. And I remember you telling me, I think about 2 years ago, that you could film people, to demonstrate what skills that they have. That if I know how to spray a car, I can get a camera that can, demonstrate, look, I can do this. And I think very little has been done about that, because the academy has always been, the face-to-face has always been the way that you are going to get credentials. Maybe that is changing. You mentioned Europass. I mean, I was involved in that project pretty much in phase one. The Europass became the CV of choice, not of choice. It was when the EC said, you want to apply for a job in the EC.
You've got to use
that's
it.
the way
right.
you're going to do it.
Right.
Maybe that's the way you need to get around this whole, what I call the interoperability issue of policymakers, that in this crisis at some stage, maybe the Commission should also say, in terms of future funding, if you want to get funds to do X and Y, you've got to join this accreditation club. Okay, it's got nothing to do with technology. Just sign it. That's the way you're going to. You want to go and get an Horizon Europe funding. You're going to make sure your institution is registered here. Maybe that's where the ILOs of this world, I think, from a policy perspective, I think, can help even projects like Dell for All. It's coming in with these, because you guys have the global insight. I think we're addressing a common problem, and. Anyway, so that's what I had almost to tail off with. Claudia, did you have any other questions for Paul, particularly in terms of, because Paul, we really would like to keep the conversation going with you. We don't want this just to be a one-off. So I mean, I didn't just remember you because you reached out to me.
Yeah, recently. Yeah. No, look, that's fine.
And I think it can really be a kind of win-win situation for us. So I want to try and find a way of how we can because I think it can be very fruitful for the Commission as well, to keep on being forced to listen what the labor market wants and needs at a time when the labor market is clearly in a crisis.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, when it comes to, I'm just your sort of point of contact, I guess. I mean, I've got colleagues who are working in the skills anticipation, in the labor market forecasting. The ILO has been putting out a number of employment monitors, and clearly as an organisation and as a representative organisation, deeply concerned about the employment crisis that we're entering into, and clearly skills and increased investment in skills, and thinking about exposure to work and work placement, particularly for young people, is squarely on the agenda, and so certainly there'd be some colleagues who I'd recommend also be part of some of the conversations you're going to be having with your network if they have a particular focus, and not just me. Yeah, look, I think, just to pick up on something you said, if you don't mind, I mean, I think when you start talking about evidence, because that's really what you're talking about for the purpose of assessment, aren't you? We want to see evidence of your skills or your knowledge or whatever. That really comes down to individual institutions, doesn't it? And whether or not, a head teacher or a lecturer responsible for a particular program has thought through and perhaps worked with others to determine what would be an acceptable form of evidence that could be delivered in a digital format to demonstrate that the learning outcomes for a particular program have been achieved, you know. And you can you can talk at the policy level about recognizing video portfolios as much as you like, but it takes someone to sit down and actually work it out on a program by program basis. And you know, if that's going to be tied to funding, if that can be driven by some sort of moderation across providers, networks of providers. I mean, I think the Centre of Excellence initiative of the Commission, where I'm involved in that on the periphery, you know, using those as anchor institutions to work with other institutions delivering in the same sector area. You know, it's those kind of networks through which you can get this kind of common understanding and shift towards changing programs in a way that provide more space for the sort of, you know, technology use that we've been talking about, and alternate ways of thinking about assessment and delivery.
You know, I think there are, and we can probably close around this one. I think assessment has been one of the biggest crises that education institutions had to deal with by migrating online. Many people had no idea what to do. Okay, so if you had to tell people what it wasn't just the teachings. A lot of people could shove their PowerPoint slides and say, here, I'm teaching. But assessing, there was so much assessing that happens sometimes with people watching over somebody doing it, or the worst case scenario is, we always examine people under examination, summative punitive conditions. Guess what? You can't do that anymore. So I think if we could all do something about rethinking assessments, I think it would be really interesting, even though, as you say, it's up to the individual institutions to determine what the assessment is. But guess what? Just look at what's happening right now in the UK.
Yes, I saw that, the moderating process.
Look at the interoperability, okay? You have a global education, VET, you know, almost supply chain and demand chain, and everything went out of sync. What do you do with that? How do you find the commonalities? And I think you need these superstructures to sometimes way even above member states like the EU that can say, this is what we're going to accept. So I think studies, research about assessment are going to be very important. Second thing I remember, you were talking about badges and credentials, all the kind of things you can assess. We haven't spoken much, but we'll do it at some other time, about the lifelong learning cycle, which I know you're passionate about and I'm passionate about, because as far as I'm concerned. So I think these are things that I think I would really like to pull you into at a future stage, of very short-term stage. Thanks, Paul. That was, I mean, let me stop the recording now.